Our first session for this final day of the symposium is titled Practice of Facilitation. We've got 6 presentations, so we're going to go all the way through them and then have a lovely chat at the end. If you're joining online, please just do post your questions in the Q&A along the way. And I'd like to start by welcoming Heloisa Feichas, the Associate Professor from the Music School Federal of the University of Minas, Gerais, Brazil. I'm very sorry for my pronunciation there. You're presenting on behalf of you and your colleague, Rejane. We're really sorry you can't be here today. Rejane, we miss you. And we look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So, I'm going to present a piece of research that's still going on. We haven't finished yet, but we are going to analyze a little bit of some of the findings of the project. It's musical leadership in 2 Brazilian social projects. So I'm in the University of Minas Gerais, and my colleague is from the University of Sergipe in the northeast of Brazil, and I'm in southeast of Brazil. So, in this research project, we want to examine the qualities of musical leadership in 2 social projects, Cariúnas and Querubins. To what extent the musical leadership in Cariúnas and Querubins leads the students to a humanizing education? That's now our main research question. How is the process of teaching and learning music in both projects? To what extent there is space for creative and collaborative learning? It's a qualitative research. We've been collecting data through observation, document analysis, semi-structured interviews with teachers and coordinators. So just a brief overview of social projects in Brazil. In the 90s, it was lots of NGOs all over the country. Foundations, institutes, all the third sector really grew in the 90s. And the actions, mainly in poor communities, in vulnerable situations, people at risk, music practice based on European models, which is very strange. If you go to the communities, you see lots of drums and black people with lots of dance and music, but when it comes to the pedagogies in these projects, most of them are really based on European models. But also there are ones valuing local culture, creating sense of belonging, cultural identity. So I found this in some literature review about articles that were published in the beginning of 2000, in the beginning of these years. There are lots of research in Brazil looking at this, so I collect this information from these articles. But also, there is a discussion about the gap between music education in social projects and university education in conservatoires. The higher degree, the higher education in universities and conservatoires, they don't prepare the musicians to deal with the situations in these communities. So this is already a discussion in Brazil. So the theoretical framework is based on Paulo Freire, our very famous philosopher. And one important point of Paulo Freire, as it was said here yesterday in the presentation, is a dialogical approach. He wants also to develop integral beings. So this humanizing education is very much concerned in developing a holistic education where mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions are all together. And this is very important. It's in pedagogy of oppressed and pedagogy of autonomy, pedagogy of hope, pedagogy of love. There are many things written by Paulo Freire. All the time he discussed the problem of the dehumanizing education that's happening, especially from the neoliberal movement. And when he was in Chile, during the dictatorship period in Brazil, he had to leave Brazil, and he watched many things outside Brazil. And he was very much, that time, back in the 70s, concerned about the process of dehumanizing The education was not considering people as human beings, but the opposite. So this is quite important for us. And another point from Paulo Freire is the banking education. He is very much concerned with this kind of education that teacher knows things, they have the knowledge, and they just deposit on the empty mind of students. And this is still very much in many levels of our education system. So to teach is not to transfer knowledge, but to create the possibilities for its own production or construction. So this is the opposite of banking education. Here I take some ideas from Peter Rejane from Guildhall. Many years ago, I met Peter here, and I worked in collaboration with Robert Wells, who was a member of the staff here in the time of the Connect project. And he came to Brazil to work with me, and since then I became very much reading lots of stuff from Peter Rejane. This has been inspiring me a lot. So this text from Peter, he talks about the attributes of a musical leader, a multi-skilled musician, the one that embraces a wide social, cultural, and musical perspective. Musical skills in this musical leadership view actually is quite broad, and it's quite hard to see a musician that has lots of skills like this, but is an ideal for me to develop this. Composition, performance, improvisation, good listening skills, including playing by ear, musical direction skills, a wide knowledge and understanding of various musical styles, playing different instruments such as keyboard and or guitar, percussion, including body percussion and the voice. And also the social skills that are quite important. Ability to work with diverse groups of people, interpersonal and intrapersonal skills, communication skills, motivating the group and inspiring them to work in harmony, showing authority without being authoritarian, being pragmatic and organized with the timetable and aims of the project. It's quite a lot, but I think I saw when I watched some Connect projects back in 2006, 7, 8, and 9, I saw lots of strategies in the workshops for collaborative and creative learning and this development of musical leadership, very much trying to touch all of these social and musical skills. So I think it's quite possible to reach this somehow. And here, from Peter Rejane and Sean Gregory, a text that they described a little bit about creative learning, that promotes and is characterized by creativity, putting imagination into practice, committed to personal and cultural development, as well as sustainable economic growth, engage people, enabling them to grow artistically and emotionally, and the collaborative, powerful way to develop creativity and innovation, establish connections and interactions, dialogical conversation is crucial, as Paulo Freire, listening, empathy, learning together from each other, encourage personal, artistic, and professional development. I must say, before we move to the project, Peter Rejane once said to me that Paulo Freire has influenced him a lot. So there's a strong connection between these ideas. So Cariúnas is nearly 300 students, 7 to 17 years old. They have many different music classes. Some photos just to illustrate. And then I'll go fast because I want to go to the findings. Querubins is nearly 100 students. They have also Afro dance and music from other, not only European music here. Here are some photos. It's a beautiful place, actually. It's close to the favela where the community, they come from this community, this favela, and they have lots of percussion also in their curriculum. So, according to the document analysis, observation of several activities and part of analysis of interviews with teachers and leaders of both social projects, it can be argued that pedagogically they concern not only on the acquisition and development of technical musical skills, but are in tune with artistic musical development, as well as personal and social growth of their students, including human values such as respect for difference, tolerance, empathy, and creativity. This is well written in the projects. Both projects have document very well written this. But the music pedagogical approach, they have the creativity written there. They have to work with creative things, but actually they don't know very much how to do. They have the intention to work, but there is not a clear music pedagogy implemented with the creative learning basis. They have still some workshops separated only about creativity, but it's not inside all the projects, not inside the mentality of the teachers. And musical leadership, the leaders regarding education background of the teachers, they come from the universities. And the problem is that higher education do not prepare them for acting there. There's a gap between their education and the reality with all the challenges within the social cultural context. There's not much content on curriculum. So they said this in the interviews, that they would love to work with more creative and collaborative strategies and in a pedagogy that would be really more inclusive, but they don't know how to do this. So they are aware and they lack this. Just to finish now, it seems that both projects theoretically have a broader view of education. However, the music leaders are not prepared to work. They were not trained for innovative pedagogies. So everything I said already. I want just to finish saying that from this research, the outcome that is nice, and I think it's optimistic now, is that they want us, me and my colleague, to go there and to start training the staff to develop something. So we are optimistic now that we can start something like a pilot, and then let's see what happens next. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heloisa. I'd now like to welcome Imogen Flower for her presentation. Imogen is finishing her doctorate at Guildhall School alongside working at the Irene Taylor Trust. So welcome very much, Imogen. Looking forward to your presentation, Who's Holding You? Insider Practitioners in Socially Engaged Music Projects.
Thanks, Jo, and thanks everyone for coming this morning online and in person. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about insider practitioners in socially engaged music projects. And I'm defining an insider practitioner as someone working within their own community to facilitate socially engaged music projects. In line with the activist phrase, nothing about us without us, which originated in the disability rights movement, I see insider practitioners as an essential part of radical community-based artistic practice. As I'll show here, this role can create numerous opportunities and advance the political goals of these projects with wide-ranging benefits. However, it also creates a distinct set of challenges regarding ethical practice and sustainability. So this paper takes the experiences of a figure called Director X as a starting point for thinking about how to maximize the benefits of the insider practitioner role and minimize the potential for harm. The context for this research is a grassroots community musical theatre project called Sex Workers Opera, which involved a performance made by and for sex workers. Sex Workers Opera aimed to strengthen community ties, to challenge cultural misrepresentations of sex workers, and to advocate for the decriminalisation of sex work. And for the past 5 years, I've worked within Sex Workers Opera as a volunteer, a performer, and an in-house researcher. During this time, I also carried out my PhD on the project. Sex Workers Opera comprises 50% sex workers and 50% allies who are friends or supporters of sex workers, though audiences don't necessarily know who is who. This 50-50 balance extends across everyone, including directors, producers, singers, actors, and musicians. And the ambiguity around people's sex work status means that sex workers can participate without outing themselves. This is really important because of the direct and very significant implications of the stigma around sex work. Importantly, this 50-50 balance also means that the project is consistently sex worker-led, something that's essential to its political goal of amplifying sex worker voices. So with at least one sex worker director in the team, Sex Workers Opera provides insight into the role and experiences of insider practitioners. The directors and I created a semi-fictionalized, gender-neutral character called Director X, who could be used in this research to safely articulate the perspectives of a sex worker director. As Director X expressed, it's very murky, and sometimes I feel that if I'm not speaking with these experiences of myself as a sex worker, it diminishes the role that I played in the whole thing. So this role of the insider practitioner has potential benefits for all involved, including community members, fellow practitioners, and insider practitioners themselves. One of the key benefits is the ease with which insider practitioners can build trust and solidarity with the people they're working with, and this was something that was touched on yesterday. So here, Director X was already involved in the community before starting Sex Workers Opera. This gave them access to a nuanced and experiential understanding of the issues affecting sex workers, as well as ways of communicating with a wider community network. For example, it enabled unconventional means of advertising and recruitment. I was already active on escort and webcam sites and forums, so I could just message people from there, and people didn't feel this scary thing of, who am I even sending this story to? To avoid being perceived as a voyeuristic artist, I was always open about being a sex worker on all of the platforms that we contacted sex workers through. Beyond recruitment as well, the trust and solidarity that came from sex worker leadership was evident in the sharing of personal experiences and the mutual and deeply personal investment in advancing sex worker rights through the activism of Sex Workers Opera. I also see it as a positive that the insider practitioner role challenges the implicit hierarchies between the artist and the community members. In this respect, Sex Workers Opera strays from the norms of socially engaged practice, where it's often the case that an outsider practitioner works with a community to facilitate a project. Where this happens, the distinction between artist and community member is usually quite clear, whether or not those exact words are used. And there's nothing inherently problematic about outsider practitioners. However, as Sophie Hope warns, an approach of parachuting in without any real contextual understanding or pre-existing relationships risks an imposition of personal and social development goals, artistic value judgments, and ultimately poor practice. The fact that sex workers and allies founded Sex Workers Opera with all their prior investment in the community indicates a sharp departure from the phenomenon of the parachutist practitioner. In fact, in their role, Director X blurred the very boundaries between artist and community member, unsettling the distinction itself and challenging the gatekeeping surrounding art and the identity of the artist. Part of what I see as radical about Sex Workers Opera is that it gave Director X, a community member, professional artistic opportunities. As a poor queer artist who had always felt like art was this incredibly natural thing but very inaccessible, it was such a powerful thing to somehow turn all of that on its head and end up facilitating and performing. And not only that, but creating a space for others in which they could also be a part of it and it would be accessible and not this thing that everyone had to pay loads of money to access. For me, that was a really healing process. Director X also spoke about the positive impacts Sex Workers Opera had for their personal life, including strengthening their own community network and giving them strong and lasting friendships. But alongside these significant benefits of and for Director X, it's important to acknowledge the specific challenges attached to the role of the insider practitioner. Eleonora Belfiore identifies a widespread problem among arts practitioners working with marginalized communities. She highlights the hidden emotional, psychological, and financial costs shouldered by these artists, suggesting that these costs are often due to a mismatch between the amount and type of work that practitioners are morally compelled to do and the resources that are available to them. Extending Belfiore's work, my research with Sex Workers Opera highlights the hidden costs to insider practitioners and the importance of providing additional support to mitigate the risk of harm to them. The specific concern here, which is a bit ironic, is that if the practitioners themselves are already marginalized and part of the community that a project is supposed to benefit, then these costs actually undermine the intentions of the project as a whole. Director X acknowledged the tension around their role with a poignant question, so poignant that I used it in my title. I do think something that made the show so beautiful was that it was sex worker-led, but then that's a really interesting question. When you're part of the community, who's holding you? In terms of emotional and psychological costs, Director X spoke about the challenge of facilitating a creative process that was centered on sex workers sharing their own lived experiences, while they were simultaneously processing their lived experiences. They recognized that they'd often been forced to park their emotional needs in order to support others working through theirs. The show is about being a sex worker, rejecting stigma and exposing whorephobia. It's about sex workers coming out to family, about isolation and violence, about community. I was dealing with all of these things. It's very hard, actually, to be one of the key facilitators of something and holding all the space for everyone else while also processing your own quite intense shit around everything. Equally, the financial costs of working on Sex Workers Opera, a grassroots, chronically underfunded project, took their toll, as the directors took on massive financial risks in order to get Sex Workers Opera off the ground, perhaps driven by their personal involvement in the community. Belfiore argues that current failures to build in sufficient support for both community members and practitioners are the legacy of morally compromised cultural policies and arts funding practices. Taking this one step further, I see these policies and practices as politically compromised. The experiences of insider practitioners like Director X demonstrate a lack of support that would reasonably deter marginalized artists from leading projects or effectively penalize them for doing so. If a socially engaged performance project for sex workers further marginalizes a sex worker director, then I fully agree with the judgment made by Director X themselves. I just don't think it's radical. So with an immense appreciation of the benefits that come from creative and activist leadership that is based in lived experience, particularly for a community that is rightly wary of being spoken for and over, I feel that there is a political obligation to support insider practitioners facilitating these projects. Meaningful investment in this area would bolster the sustainability and the integrity of community-based arts projects, meanwhile protecting the extent to which they are, in fact, radical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imogen. I'd now like to welcome Georgia Nicolaou to the floor. Georgia is a Cypriot musician, composer, an educator and a researcher at the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp, University of Antwerp. Thank you so much, Georgia. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Joe said, I'm a musician, I'm a mover also, composer, educator, and researcher. Throughout my experience in music making with children, I have noticed how important the impact of the facilitator is and how crucial is the choice of the material in community music workshops. In this presentation, I will reflect on these concepts by talking about an exploratory case study that took place at an asylum seeker center in the Netherlands in the beginning of 2022 as part of the research project Moving in Musicking, Promoting Social Inclusiveness for Children at Risk. This research project was carried out within the research group Corporeal at the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp, and it was supervised by Professor Luc Nijs. The case study involved a series of community music workshops for the children of the asylum seeker center Rijswijk. 11 children between the age of 6 to 11 participated. I entered the facility as a practitioner and researcher through the non-governmental organization De Vrolijkheid. This organization promotes cultural participation through creative activities at the asylum seeker centers in the Netherlands. With their assistance, I received ethical consent for participating in research from both the parents as well as the children. The aim of the study was to explore my role as an artist facilitator in active music making with children, whereby activities build on the strong connection between music and movement, No prior knowledge in a musical instrument was needed and no specific output was expected. Moreover, there was a focus on involving the children in the process of designing the activities. During the workshops, I used pedagogical documentation, including drawings, mind maps, and reflective discussions after every session, in order to gain insight into the children's world. Based on a cyclical process of participatory action research of plan, act, observe, evaluate, I incorporated the findings from every cycle in the next one by analyzing the video recordings and the immediate reflections after every session. In this way, I could apply the results directly in my professional practice and prepare accordingly for the coming workshop. The content of the workshops derived from some key pedagogical concepts that guided the design and the evolution of the activities. A first concept was the child-centered approach. Since the case study involved a group of vulnerable children, it was necessary to listen and incorporate their voice during the planning of every workshop. Besides the informed planning, the emphasis was on the process of co-creation, where the music involved was created together with the children. The use of existing music was limited to the warming up activities, where it served as a background support for moving. All the other activities invited the children to experiment with sound produced with their own voice, body, and the small pitched and unpitched percussion handed to them. Musical ideas were collectively manipulated and then composed in the form of songs. This approach supported the idea of collective creativity as a powerful means to collaborate and make music within a group. A second key concept was the strong connection between music and movement. The aim was to implement the empowering nature of movement in an embodied engagement with music during the process of joint creation. For example, the children were invited to improvise a sound accompanied by a movement or a movement that produced a sound. In this way, they could directly conceive that the body is always involved in sound making, varying from the most subtle arm movement needed to play a small instrument to the stamping and jumping while performing a body percussion phrase. Another key pedagogical concept was improvisation. This spontaneous act of expression was the starting point of many activities, serving the purpose of free experimentation with sound and movement. For example, children were invited to move freely in space, to experiment with some instruments, and to use their voice. Conducted improvisation was also used in several activities. A fourth concept was the process of composing. In this case, composition was envisioned as the gathering and organizing of improvised ideas into a form. The children were assisted in transforming the ideas into instant composing of songs and the creation of graphic scores. In this way, their creations could be reproduced. After the completion of the workshops, the data was analyzed using a grounded theory approach. The triangulation of the video and reflection data, together with the reflections of the children, the discussions, and the drawings I talked about before, allowed reflecting on the pedagogical framework, identifying recurring elements and grouping the elements into overarching themes and different sub-themes. Here, I zoom in on 3 sub-themes that provide an interesting potential for direct practical implications. The first theme concerns verbal versus non-verbal communication. The role of language in instruction is prominent in explaining particular activities. However, in the case of community music in asylum centers, where not all the children speak the same language, non-verbal communication can support the dynamic relation of facilitator and participant, allowing to bypass the multilinguistic explanations. One constructive implication for facilitators is the role of gestures in their body language while instructing or taking part in activities. This implication is directly related to the theme of verbal versus nonverbal, while gestures can either support verbal language or replace the language. The second chosen theme concerns engagement through active participation. This was meaningful for building a relationship between the artist facilitator and the participants towards the common goal of experiencing music and movement together. From the analysis of the immediate reflections, it appeared to be an important precondition for a successful session. A practical implication was related to the role of the children and connected to the theme of active participation is the engagement of the body while singing. Movement can assist expression and aid the feeling of rhythm while singing. Coordinated movement can vary from stepping and swinging to the underlying rhythm to involving the whole body while doing body percussion. The third theme concerns the non-linear approach during facilitation. The content of the workshops followed a non-linear approach in differentiating the activities according to the needs of the children at that particular moment. Non-linearity was also present in the interaction between the multiple facets of music making, such as composition, improvisation, moving, listening, performing, steering the process of joint creation. A practical implication for artist facilitators related to the non-linear approach is the frequent variation of activities to keep the children actively engaged. For example, a set of short activities can be prepared for warming up, to act as energizers, to act as body and mind release, or to aid concentration. The activities can be grouped in categories and used when needed. Coming back to the role of the facilitator in regard to the role of the children, it is indeed important to create a dynamic relationship through collaboration and a sense of shared purpose. The starting point for this exploratory case study generated from the need to question certain concepts such as repertoire versus composing, the role of movement in music making, the role of improvisation and collective composing, and the participatory design of the workshops. Indeed, it is important to consciously choose and evolve the material that is used in musical workshops in light of supporting the needs of the participants. Facilitators should thoroughly consider the types of music used in order to support positive change, expression, and emancipation among participants. As we discussed during the past days, there is a need to reinvent the role of the music facilitator in intercultural contexts in light of current issues like immigration, democracy, human rights, and freedom of cultural expression. Finally, given the increasing number and demand for community music projects, it is important to address this role in view of professionalizing musicians who wish to engage in the domain of social impact of music making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia, and you're reminding me of a beautiful movement and music activity that you led in Antwerp when we met so many years ago. So if we're lucky in the break, ask Georgia, she might do a bit of that. I'd now like to welcome Ian Middleton to the floor, please. Ian Middleton is an assistant professor of ethnomusicology at the Universidad of Los Andes, Bogota, Colombia. Thank you very much, Ian. Welcome.
I'd like to share with you some results and reflections from a project I co-directed in Colombia last year, which was called Our Histories in the Music of the Barrio. I'll tell you a little bit about the context we were working in, how we carried out the project, and then I'll bring 3 reflections that were generated from interviews I carried out with participants that help us think about the importance of creating digital narratives to understand one's surroundings, how they can be used in collective musical creation, in this case songwriting, and how a particular form of local holism might be useful both for them and in other contexts. So, in the southwest of Colombia is a city called Cali, and to the west of that city is the hillside neighborhood of Siloé. Similar to favelas in Brazil, it's a difficult place to grow up and live. It's in many ways a microcosm of the various forms of violence that have characterized Colombia in its recent history. Competing armed groups have tried to dominate it, but it's currently dominated by drug trafficking gangs. And the Foundation CIDOC has been working there for over a decade to try and reduce violence in the neighborhood. One of their projects that I started working with in 2014 is called Tambores de Siloé. They provide free free music education for young people in the neighbourhood, with this anti-violence ethos, but all kinds of other objectives as well are mixed in there. Kids learn to play these instruments that you can see are loosely based on the marimba tradition of the Pacific Southwest of Colombia. But they learn to play music from there, but also popular Latin American music and music from the African diaspora in general. In 2019, I became aware of possible funding from Agrigento. There is money, please apply. And with Alexandra and Moises, two directors of Tambores, we proposed and carried out a collaborative applied research project in which Tambores Asiloe constructed digital narratives about their family and neighborhood, later using these histories for creative musical projects. They built a bass guitar out of recycled instruments, and they composed a song collectively, as well as making 2 short films. So what we'll see in a moment come from one of those short films, and they are the reflections of 3 monitores, kind of like tutors, who formed a bridge between the directive group and the other participants. The film was mainly made by them for them, but it helps us reflect on important features of the project, I believe. It's available on YouTube if you would like to watch it. So first, Maida tells us about how filming digital narratives was important for her.
Me gustó mucho haber participado de este proyecto de mis historias porque pues eso nos acercó más a todo el grupo. Estuvimos que todo un día en la casa de Valentina, cuando estuvimos entrevistando Urkuki. Entonces allí fue donde compartimos más. Desde ahí fue que se notó ya como el cambio.
So a whole day of film shoot and various other days of carrying out interviews with local people was grueling, but it was enlightening for her. She learnt a lot about her surroundings. But she also emphasizes here and elsewhere in interviews how it was important for forging connections, for opening up as individuals and developing a sense of trust, both within and beyond the group. In a forthcoming text that I've co-written with Juan Sebastián Rojas, who will speak later today, we argue that difficult music making together can help generate positive, mutually reinforcing spirals of empathy, trust, and cooperation. Here we see that happening before any genuine musicking has even taken place. And I would add that perhaps critical thinking needs to go in the mix here as well. The fact that these interviews processes were reflexive and dynamic were important for this group, and I think should be elsewhere. One example of this was how the house of another monitora, Valentina, and her partner, Lady, became a kind of focal center for the project and provided emotional support for people within and beyond the group of Tambores. We can speak more about that if you're interested. Valentina herself emphasized in her reflections how the process of writing a song together was transformational for Tambores. It was the first time they'd done this, and both she and Maida talk about how it was important.
El momento en el que llegamos a la composición, bueno, al principio como tímidos.
Al principio fue como frustrante porque no sabíamos qué hacer, cómo empezar, y empezamos fue a recochar, y entre recocha fue que surgieron ideas y empezamos a crear.
Esto es un barrio de gente ambulante, de donde sacaron que somos sicarios, narcotraficantes. No, primero lo de nada.
Y ya empezamos a escuchar pistas y bueno, empezamos como a acomodar la letra, o sea, éramos muy ingeniosos con las palabras y...
Empezamos a comer y ya ahí entre recochas se nos empezó a ocurrir letras, ideas, ritmos.
Salió así de recochando, entonces, claro, o sea, ahí la recocha fue productiva.
So they were quite surprised how moving away from more structured workshops on songwriting towards this freer activity of making the song work together could be productive. I wasn't. It was designed that way, and it worked, thankfully. For me, it's just another case of how some of the games that they play can end up being quite serious games in the sense of Sherry Ortner. I was surprised how, despite their musical training, they resorted to like an urban music paradigm of finding a backing track online and rapping along to it in order to develop their song. It later took other forms. Some sections maintained that sort of rap basis, but it was surprising how they went back to their toolkit despite their musical training. Finally, Carlos gives us interesting food for thought about a particular form of holism that I believe I've worked to understand and identify and work with through my long-term interaction with tambores. And I think there I'm responding to a seen need to engage explicitly and empirically with different value systems through applied ethnomusicology.
Todos los talleres me gustaron porque yo soy de las personas que le vas más como a adquirir más conocimiento. Pues hablaron sobre la Comuna 20, sobre cómo era antes, sobre la historia del M19 aquí en Siloé y todas esas cosas así, y son temas que yo no conocía, pero son muy interesantes.
Acostumbra uno como a hacer lazos de solidaridad entre los vecinos.
So Carlos would often say he liked everything, and I don't think he was just being obsequious in that kind of commentary. I think his comments resonate with a system of values which has been analysed and documented by anthropologists and ethnomusicologists, especially among Afro-Colombian but also indigenous communities of the Pacific, whereby they demand that all aspects of a decent life be enacted without any of those being compromised by the other. So, for example, that economic development mustn't compromise ecological sustainability, and human development is placed at the centre of what's important. This refuse to prioritise is a form of resisting some of the violences of late capitalism. But here we see it among a group of people who don't straightforwardly self-identify as Afro or indigenous. So it's a form of working class resistance, and it's present in how we planned and carried out the project and in the way that young people engaged in that wide variety of activities. And I think it was this value system that allowed the young people of Tambores de Siloé to engage so deeply with a wide variety of both planned and sui generis activities within the project, including adding their voices to demands for structural change in the national strike of 2019-2021, which has resulted in the first progressive government in Colombia this year. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. We'd now like to welcome, this is where your very intriguing spinny wheel will come into action. So if you have a wheel, do get that ready. And if you don't, there's a box of wheels just here down by the side. I'd love to welcome Irena Müller-Brozovic now to speak for us. And Irena is from the University of Musikvermittlung at the Anton Bruckner Private University in Linz, Austria. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this conference, and it's a pleasure to listening and to your lectures and your discussions. Resonance, as Hartmut Rosa told us in his keynote, is a quality of relationship that can be of importance in social music projects. In my completed dissertation, a theoretical hermeneutic study, I've dealt intensively with Hartmut Rosa's resonance theory, starting from the research question of how socially engaged musicians can facilitate a musical involvement in music projects and which aspects need to be considered to be considered. In addition to Rosa's resonance theory, my research also draws on literature from the fields of musicology, music pedagogy, theater, and cultural studies. In this short presentation, I will only go into the findings of my research that I represent using a dynamic model in the form of this turntable or a frisbee. You can use it as you like it. This model consists of 4 layers. First, the defining characteristics of resonance. Second, the 4 dimensions of resonant relationships. Third, the underlying principles. And fourth, the favorable impulses. These 4 layers also correspond to the structure of my lecture. To the first layer, resonance in the sense of Hartmut Rosa has, as he told us, 4 defining characteristics: an affection, self-efficacy, transformation, and uncontrollability, or Unverfügbarkeit, as we name it in German. A responsive, and not a synchronous, but a responsive resonance as an interaction of different voices cannot be completely planned and behaves in an open-ended way. A possible alienation, therefore, corresponds to a basic fact of world relations, which is why I, in contrast or in addition to Rosa, also include a possible alienation among the defining characteristics of responsive resonant relations. I illustrate my model with a practical example from Switzerland. This is the music wagon of the Lucerne Symphony Orchestra. The orchestra calls this mobile venue a rolling box full of possibilities. When the music wagon arrives in a new area, it surprises, but perhaps it also irritates. Both correspond to a possible affection for all people involved, the people from the area as well as the socially engaged musicians from the music wagon. The wagon invites to discover and to participate. It enables self-efficacy. Through the presence of the wagon and the music projects that are happening, the place and all people involved change, also the musicians. This is not an appropriation, but a transformation. Since the projects in the wagon are created together with the people on site, it is not possible to fully plan and predict what will emerge and happen. There's a great deal of uncontrollability associated with the music wagon. There are bound to be situations again and again in which people don't get involved, what is on offer, and the music wagon doesn't mean anything to them. The musicians involved must therefore also reckon with a certain or possible alienation. Now for the second layer. Following Rosa's 4 dimensions of meaningful and empowering relations, I talk of a resonant relation to music. For example, when people in the music wagon intensively engage with musical ideas, material, and challenges, when working on a song or improvising, when dancing or drawing to music, or when thinking, speaking, or writing about music. Resonant relations with music happen in creative social interactions with music. For example, in participatory activities, community projects, or flash mobs around the music wagon. Resonant relations in music occur in immersive, existentially significant experiences with music. They are based on a performative access and show an intensive quality of co-presence among the participants, as can be experienced, for example, in circle songs or staged performances that happen in the music wagon. Self-relations through music open up new visionary perspectives in a responsive relationship with oneself. Usually, the individual dimensions do not occur in isolation, but as a combination of several forms of relations. The third layer are the underlying principles and conditions that favor resonant relations. As interactions, resonant music relations are based on co-action and co-creation and consists of 4 mixes. A first prerequisite for resonance is mediopassivity, as Hartmut Rosa told us. Mediopassivity means a simultaneous listening and responding. Interestingly, the mission statement of the music wagon is a description or a possible description of mediopassivity. I quote, "Based on the idea that the audience listens to the orchestra sets out to listen to the audience in turn and to deepen the listening together," end of quote. Second, like the body of an instrument and also like the music wagon, resonant relations need simultaneous openness and closedness. Openness implies an inner vulnerability. Therefore, a resonant relation requires social recognition and appreciation, and in addition to openness and empathy, a certain closedness and safe space where self-awareness and an expectation of self-efficacy are possible. For with too much openness, one's own voice is lost. There's the danger of an echo or even of manipulation. Too much closedness, on the other hand, prevents one from engaging with the other person, with the context, and with the unexpected. The mixture of simultaneous openness and closeness is what I call medioordination. A third mixture I call medioconjunctivity. This is because resonance is based on relations that are committing yet loose. In medioconjunctive situations, commitment and freedom, individual engagement and willingness to take responsibility, individual interest and a common good are fundamental. Thus, in winter, the music wagon stands at public meeting places and invites people to spontaneously make music and experiment. A special relevance emerges from the fourth mixture of resonant relationships. It is based on simultaneously existing weak and strong evaluations, as Rosa calls them. The weak evaluations are connected with a desire, whereas the strong evaluations mean an inner convictions and values. Musicians with an affinity for resonance do not only want to play, but they consider their music making as an art, as something important, urgent, necessary. I speak of a simultaneous sensuality and meaningfulness. With sensuality, I relate to the weak evaluations, whereas meaningfulness stands for the strong evaluations. The musical program in the music wagon is fun, I hope, but also meaningful, for it's created together with the hosts and brings people and music together. There are 3 other underlying principles for resonant music relations. In order to enter a relationship at all, there must be a certain perceptibility and accessibility. In addition, resonant music relationships are based on collaborations, for example, in differently composed groups or participants or in interdisciplinary projects. Since exclusions take place with every relationship, another fundamental principle is a sensitivity to discrimination. On the 4th layer of the turntable, I name favorable impulses for a resonance-oriented music project, namely a core idea, its rules, the handling of temporality, physicality, spatiality, materiality, risk, and resistance. All these impulses are related to the aspects mentioned so far. The model in the form of a turntable allows to play through the aspects in different constellations and to conceptualize or reflect potential resonant relations with corresponding guiding questions. Finally, I invite you to turn the turntable to the following constellations, if you would like, and try to imagine a scenario for the music wagon. Resonant relation to music, self-efficacy, spatiality, and media ordination. Now, here's my imagined scenario. In a workshop, children are invited to look for two stones in the surrounding with which they can produce as many different sounds as possible. In a small group, they develop a music piece especially designed for the music wagon. The piece combines fixed parts and improvisation. If the children want, a percussionist from the orchestra also plays along. In the final performance, one group plays their piece just for themselves, another group makes a video recording, still a third group decides to play the piece for an audience. Now, please choose yourself one of these performances and for the next few seconds, imagine what the piece might sound like. Whether resonance emerges in this scenario remains open, because resonance is a subjective and situational relational quality. Nevertheless, I hope to promote resonant music relations with my turntable and guiding questions for each aspect mentioned. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Can I now welcome our final speakers of the morning? We've got through to the end. It's been quite a lot, so well done for bearing with us. We have Anne, the Bishop, and Filip Verneert, who will be joining us. Anne is from the University College of Applied Science and the Arts of Ghent. Oh, we've got it here. And Filip is from the Catholic University Leuven School of Arts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. We'll quickly go through our presentation. We'll do it in duo, so we'll change a few slides with you. Well, in this contribution, we elaborate on a specific participatory music project with free improvisation in Belgium, Tozo. We will elaborate a bit more later. It's an ongoing research where also in the past we studied the influence of this project on the participants, on their sense of belonging. But in this study, we really focus on the facilitators, trying to look for the pedagogical, artistic strategies. And well, we try to see if we can implement this in formal music education and what's the benefits and the implications can be. So we'll quickly go over the starting points, the Austin Street Orchestra, the backgrounds, the results, and a theoretic framework.
Okay. Just very briefly, as the field of this participatory music practices in Belgium grew actually strongly since the 90s of last century, and we called it then social artistic practices. So the naming is different, but actually the practice stayed the same. The background is poverty elevation programs, actually, where cultural participation was talked about as an important human right. So this human rights perspective is the background of many of these projects in Belgium. So what they want to do actually, in general, very general, is give people living in difficult circumstances the possibility for cultural expression and contribute to more nuanced image building. But today we are, of course, 30 years later, and a lot of projects are funded by the arts decree, for example. So it's in the arts in Flanders. In Brussels, a little less. It's closer to education programs. But we see now a wide variety of projects, from grassroots projects still, but as well a lot of them are institutionalized. And what is important for our lecture today is that this world of social music projects or participatory projects is still very separate from formal music education. Okay, so the project we analyzed is TOZO. It's the Ostend Street Orchestra. It's an ensemble which works with a very diverse group of people, including as well homeless people, but a diverse group of people. So they say they are an inclusive orchestra. They have a lot of musicians, as you can see, and they are very strongly rooted in the local context of Ostend. That's a city near the sea in Belgium. Specific for them is that they work with collective improvisation, so the collective process of making and creating music together is what the orchestra is all about. And specific as well is that the orchestra is led by 3 coaches simultaneously. This is a trumpet player, a singer, and as well a drummer. And they are very creative, not only in the music itself, but as well in the costumes, the things they do on stage, as you can see here. And Tina, who's sitting in the audience, can tell you more about it because she's working there as well sometimes.
Yes, thank you. So quickly about the method we use, it's a standard design. Interesting is that we did really in-depth interviews and video-stimulated recall over a rather long period in 2017 and 2021. The coding was done also by 2 researchers separately, and then we merged the codes. Leading to a grounded theory where we found 5 artistic pedagogical strategies, I will briefly discuss, but also 2 overall reflecting themes that we labeled inclusion and collective experiential learning. Well, the pedagogical artistic strategies we found are in a way related to other research in this field, of course. Sometimes there's a slight difference depending on the situation. We already heard that, of course, these projects are always very situated. Here, one of the themes we found was a need to rethink standard musical parameters. As one coach said, a liberation from the idea that you have to follow certain rules. It can create an explosion of energy. It puts humanity back into the music. Also, the frequent use of embodied interaction, where the whole body was used not only in giving non-verbal cues, but also in dancing, extreme movement as there was playing music and so on. Co-coaching was very typical for this project. It's not always done like that, not always possible that different coaches can work together really in a project. Here that was the case. And there was like a kind of teaching or facilitating through negotiations. The coaches often didn't agree. They had different meanings of what should be happening in the orchestra during rehearsals and performances. But at the end they said, we search and find, we lose and win. We all have our own ideas, but we don't always agree, but it pushes us to remain open-minded. Collaboration was a next theme we found. This is, of course, found in many other similar research, where you start in these community music projects from the input of the participants, start for their stories, their qualities. Also, the discussion between trying to connect with the group and playing your role as a leader and a conductor. Also, personal musical skills. Well, we deem that as a very personal, individual kind of tips and tricks that coaches or facilitators have that are very personal, that cannot be imitated or not transformers, but somebody else cannot do it. It's very personal, your own tips and tricks. It's also very important, we deem that as a facilitator, to keep this tips and tricks. the two overall categories, which are not, of course, not strategies we found, we named them inclusion. A number of statements refer to a kind of inclusive mindset of the coaches, dismissing a hierarchical relationship between themselves and the orchestra, keeping an egalitarian stance, of course. Some coach said it was a kind of double attitude. You're a coach, but at the same time, you don't have the monopoly on the truth or say we have fixed structures here or we do it like that. The type of learning, to finish, that was put into practice in this TOZO project was we named collective experiential learning, where learning is situated at the level of the experience in the moment. Also collective form of learning, where also the group of participants, but also the facilitators learn at the same time. And music is well used as a medium, as a process instead of a result.
Okay. Doesn't work. Oh. Okay. No, it's one back actually.
One back.
Huh? I think this is not working so good. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So what we did now, Filip and myself are both active in teacher training, music teacher training. So we wanted to look at these pedagogical artistic strategies in this type of projects and link it to teaching strategies. And we started with a well-known model in teacher education, which is the PCK model of Schulman. Everyone working in teacher education will know this model, but very briefly, it's very easy actually. Schulman says that you have two types of knowledge which you need as a teacher, and this is pedagogical knowledge. So, for example, knowledge about learning processes, knowledge about classroom management, this type of pedagogical knowledge. Oh, maybe just look at me and not at the slide. And then you have as well content knowledge. So this is the knowledge about your subject matter, for example, music in this case. And then in the intersection between pedagogical and content knowledge, you have pedagogical content knowledge, which is the combination of the two. And the added value of Schulman's model was that that often in teacher education before, we thought about pedagogical knowledge in a very generalistic sense, but he says, no, you need as well very specific pedagogical knowledge, content-specific pedagogical knowledge. Now, if we try to link our findings to this model of PCK, then we actually miss a very important thing, and this is the value-laden or the ideological aspect of teaching strategies. So what we did then is we proposed actually a different model, or we added a third circle to the model of Schulman, and we called this third circle the worldview of the teacher. So this worldview means actually that depending on the worldview of the teacher or the coach, different pedagogical choices and as well different choices in terms of content will be made. So this worldview relates to the general beliefs and the values that underpin the educational practices of the teacher. So we think this value-laden aspect was missing in a former model of teacher training. And now I try again. For the technicians, I think there's something wrong with this. Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah, they can switch it? Okay, next slide, please. I will just start talking already. So, to go back to the conclusion, we go back to the main question we had: how can participatory music practices inspire formal music education? Of course, formal music education is very diverse. You can as well think about implications for secondary music education, but we focused on music teacher training. So what we think actually is that participatory music projects have a transformational potential for teacher training. And we think this starts with the experience of being immersed in a project as an artistic facilitator, just working with diverse groups in totally different contexts than what you're used to, we think it broadens a lot your strategies as a music teacher. And what is especially important is to become aware of the value-laden beliefs and frameworks that you have as a teacher with you. You always have values and beliefs with you, and the issue is to become aware of it. And as well, you can develop pedagogical strategies for inclusive teaching, I think, a lot more in this type of projects and practices. But why we really added this third circle of worldview to the model is that we think that it's really important to work explicitly in teacher training with these underlying values and beliefs, because they're always there, and often we only talk about it, they stay implicit. But in this type of projects, they become explicit, and we think it's important to use that in music teacher training. That's it.
Thank you so much, Anne and Philippe. Can I welcome all of the speakers onto the stage, please? You might want to stay with us. And also feeling a little bit like, you know, when there's a game of football and they add the extra time at the end. And we've had quite a few disruptions. We've had the trains and the snow and some technical slides. So I just want to check in with John, who is always our excellent timekeeper. John. Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. And we have a question coming through on the online chat already, so we will turn to that in a moment. If you're joining online, please do pop your question in there for us and let us know a bit about you. That would be nice to know who you are. Before we pass over to the audience, I just want to say I was really struck, it's fantastic, really struck by the kind of layers of the actual physical layers of complexity that you're all talking about, and talking about things not being an either or, but a both. So we started that with Heloisa's, you know, musical skills and social skills, insider, outsider status at the same time, an openness and a closedness, the messiness, but the clarity that comes through that. So I was really struck by this kind of both, but then at the same time, the juxtaposition between, I think, what your presentations were speaking to here, and Philippe and Heloisa, between the practices themselves not really resonating with wider structural value systems of the education institutions that you're part of. So I was wondering if, mindful of that, if whether you could talk about the possibilities for co-action and co-creation in your contexts and projects. There's quite a lot there. Does anyone want to kick us off? And we should have a microphone. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, go for it, Georgia.
I think in all our work, for me, the core was the role of the facilitator as being really multi-dimensional and also open to everything, open to receive, to learn, to adapt. So the competences of the facilitator is the core of our work, and we should develop it, make it in the official education, and inform all aspects of education and facilitation. Maybe someone else?
I think the principle of media ordination is important here, that you have an impulse or an idea and you share it, but you're listening to it, and you don't have strict ideas what you're going to do, but then you have to co-create it. And maybe this could be a possible way to change things, that we are not fixed on our ideas, but we are inviting the others to co-create with us.
I think Georgia mentioned the sense of shared purpose being a really important part of the foundations of a project or of a piece of work, and I think that rings true in my thinking about my work as well. That kind of shared sense of purpose, sense of mutual investment, is a really important part of steering how you co-create and how you, what was the other, co-act.
Yeah, I think that was one of the presenters' words, actually. Thank
right,
you.
Yeah. So I think that.
I think it's important to challenge our institutions, the universities and conservatoires, this place where the music is taught to form musicians professionally. And in case of Brazil, and I think in Latin America as well, we have a huge gap between what's done inside institutions and outside. So the co-creation, we need to really think how to bridge this gap and to really start creating something new. There's a space in between that needs to be changed somehow. And for me in Brazil, it's quite a long way to go to really bridge this gap. And I think it's important to think about strategies and really be able to construct something new and be able to co-create. We need to think and reflect about what are the gaps inside the big gap. There are little gaps as well. How we can manage this. So it's a big point, a big reflection we have to make.
Well, I will briefly comment also, if I may, on the same thing. Indeed, there's a big gap between the striving of excellence in the conservatoire and community music projects. There was a big talk yesterday. The panel was very interesting, but still, if we look at our institutions, this gap still exists. And if we would talk to other professionals, teachers, certainly in Western art, classical music, they would, I'm sure that some of them really dismiss this kind of work we are doing. So instead of finding a way to co-create or to resonate, to cite Hartmut Rosa, that would be great. Of course, it's a question that still remains to be solved.
Yes, I nevertheless think that there is more and more awareness that this model of a soloist musician is not the only model which can continue in the conservatoires. So I think that another musicianship which is broader, oriented towards communities, I really believe that it will be more present in conservatoires the next years. I believe that, and I feel that. I mean, I talk with a lot of people, so I'm optimistic, maybe, Joe. But I wanted to add one thing to the pedagogical strategies we were talking about. Of course, there are a lot of things like collaboration and descriptors about how coaches work. But what I see as well, and maybe this was not in our data, but it's coming from my teaching experience. What is important as well is that you can. There is no good way or only way to do it. You as well have your own background as a human being, and so I see a lot of different ways coaches work in this project. Some of them are very directive, others are less directive. Some of them, they start with the input from the people, others do it otherwise, and it works. And so what I think is important as well is that you are authentic as a human being there, working with people. So this is something I wanted to just remark with all the principles we were talking about.
Thank you. If I can just come in on that last point, I agree. And I think one thing that comes out to a certain extent in all of our papers, or presentations rather, is this engagement with particular individuals or organisations who are doing it well. And I think our role, one of our roles as academics, can be describing really thickly those good practices of individuals and organisations, often outside of formal education, so they're informal or they're alternative or they're antagonistic educators in some ways. But in order to understand how they make it work, I think we could do more as academics and researchers to really thickly describe their practices. But I think we're all doing that to some extent, right? But
that's such a brilliant point, and you can tell that we're amongst expert facilitators here because everybody's beautifully just offered one very succinct phrase. Why don't we pass out to the audience in the room at this moment before we go to our online questions? Yeah, I can see Dave. And then, yeah, we've got a couple in the front here.
Firstly, thank you to all of you for fantastic presentations. It's quite hard to keep up with the pace of ideas in the last hour. It's fantastic. I think building on what the discussion that you've just had, I wonder then whether there's anything to be explored in thinking from the perspective of your own projects and your own presentations. What does music making reveal, therefore, about what it might mean to be human and or post-human?
If it's right, I might start. I'm not sure we'll get to the post-human, but I think we're seeing deep humanity, right? And a lot of what I see as being a positive side of that deep humanity is engaging in feedback loops, so paying close attention in all sorts of ways and reacting in ways that are to the benefit of the individuals and groups we're working with or we're being with. And I think that's good musicianship in micro and macro scales of periodicity, right? I think that's what lots of our good musicians are doing well. And I think it's what we need as a society, certainly going through and after the fourth industrial revolution. I'm not sure if that gets us to be post-human, but I think it's a lot of what we need. And putting ourselves at the service of the mutual benefit as well, without being servicial, if that's a word in English, it's probably not, but putting ourselves at the service of others.
Thank you, Dave, for this intriguing question. My mind, I immediately thought about the TOZO project and the coaches, which were very experienced coaches, not new students, really coaches with a lot of experience socially and musically. And after the project or during the project, they all stated very firmly that it changed their beliefs. So I was very surprised that these people with a lot of experience in social music project still said, this kind of project changed my values, my beliefs. It broadened my mind even more. And especially they practically all teach in general music education. It also changed their way of teaching and their way of looking at, let's say, formal music education or the students or the way that they did. So for me, and I'm not sure if it's an answer, but it has to do with humanity, because it comprises all kinds of parts in our lives, politically, socially, ideas, also the way we think about music education, about relationships, and so on. And so this kind of very powerful, almost activism force, revolutionary force that is inside of working with these projects.
About the human being, the human values, what I saw in this project I presented today, I heard from some children. They come from the very poor backgrounds, the favelas, and when they come and learn and play together and they go to the stage, normally they go to performance after the semester, the end of the semester. When they perform, I watched recently 2 performances from both projects. It's amazing to see the joy in their faces. They speak about the self-worth issues that normally in their communities they are involved with all the drug dealers things and poverty, and they don't have proper food to eat, and they come to the project, they have food, they are fed there, they pass all day after school, and then when they go to stage and they perform something, it changed their lives. It really changed their lives. It changed their perspectives. It changed the self-worth they feel that they can be someone in life, they can have a future. So it's a tiny thing, but it's really impressive how it changed according to the teachers when they speak about their families, also what they say when they have meetings with the families. So it's so important what they do. So we need to find a way to keep growing these kind of projects. It's very important for their lives to have a new perspective.
Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next question because we're getting some more come through the chat. But first of all, I did see hands up in the room. Because some of us are joining for today only, please give your name and where you're from. So Sigrun, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. My name is Sigrun Griffiths, Sigrun Griffiths. I've taught at the Guildhall for many, many years, and I was one of those leaders that you will have observed in the Connect days, Heloisa. I run a community interest company working extensively with the homeless community and adults in recovery. My question is about where we place musical quality when we are evaluating our projects. So are we happy with the outcome of our work as long as there is engagement, there is empowerment, there is meaningful communication and all of those things that we are describing and we know so very well? Or is it fair to assume that a person's experience of the project will be further strengthened if the artistic outcome is of significance? And therefore, how do we consider that in the training of our practitioners and the delivery of our practice, our projects, and the way we evaluate them afterwards?
I will say about the case of the children that I work with, like I strive usually when there is enough workshops to make a performance at the end of some workshops, and I always see that this is maybe 100 times more empowering to be part of a performance and deliver and have an audience and share or record the performance, because when they prepare to go on stage and rehearse together, and they sense more the group, and they concentrate more on the act of performing, but also understanding what is to perform music or dance. So I think that when you incorporate together with the workshops or community music project performance and sharing for audiences in any ways, it's really powerful.
I think there are different kinds or a variety of qualities. And as I'm also teaching at a Conservatory, we strive for virtuosity and perfect music making. But I think perfect music making is not always, or is often not resonant in the sense of Hartmut Rosa. So resonant music making is a different kind of quality. And this can occur on the street with street music or wherever. But I think they're somehow linked. When you are playing or music, when your music making is in a resonant mode, you're also it also gets you're motivated and you're open to the others. And so I hope it's also in a music way a quality, but it's a different kind of quality. So it's not the perfect one, but the resonant mode.
And I know you wanted to add to this very quickly, and then I know time is going so fast, so I might move to the online.
I actually agree with you, but I wanted to add that when I do this type of project in the music teacher training, often my students, when they are involved in the project in the beginning, they become the social worker. So they take the other position, not the position of being an artist. So I have to pull them back to be and say, you are the artist here, so it's your responsibility to make something good with this group. So I think actually it's really important that as a musician, facilitator, you try to make the best out of it and try to bring it to a high level. But of course, it can be a different level, but you have to bring it to a high level, because it's important for the people when they are on stage that they can perform something good. I think it's really important. You have as well another narrative in this field. I'm aware of that, but as I work with musician facilitators, I think it's really important, the artistic in this field. But you have to look at the quality, maybe different. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
And it depends on your notion of quality, which we'll talk more about this afternoon as well. Great question. Just moving here to the online questions, we have a question from Liv McLennan saying that she noticed an underlying theme of struggle in the presentations, whether that's between artist facilitators working in the projects, or the struggle of the experience of material and or social conditions, or political struggle, particularly for marginalised groups. Is struggle fundamental to socially engaged music projects? Should it be? Thank you, Liv.
Were you reaching out for this, Ian? Okay. It always takes me a bit longer than I ever have in this kind of format to actually formulate any sort of real thought. But I think that struggle is integral to resistance, and that resistance should be integral to all socially engaged arts projects. That's not to say that it always is. That's my quick thought.
Ian's saying he agrees with that. We could also throw that one back to the crowd if anybody's got a thought on struggle. Oh, Gloria does. Go on, Gloria.
I was waiting. Yeah, but thank you all for your works. Those are very inspiring. But from a critic perspective, which I love, I'm thinking about the accessibility. It's not just with Resonance, but all the entire projects, because when you don't have access to the code, to the musical code, or to the language code, it's very difficult to resonance. I mean, at least to understand what is going on. And it happens with music a lot, and it goes through education, because if you don't understand the code, not just the code of symphonic music, but also the code of popular music that communities have, when you go to work with them, and you think in the view that you are going to give something, but instead they are the ones who gives you many things, and that's a way of resonance as well. But with that in mind, because I have a very good indigenous friend, very close friend, that said that he was surprised when he understood that he was the other. He thought of himself as, I am the other, when we refer to the other. So the question is, with that in mind, how can you think that we could go forward to think about the other as musicians?
Gloria, I think that's such a good question, and I'm wondering if there was a holding space in the foyers where we could map some of these questions. That's the way I would love to work, particularly because we have online questions that have been asked right at the top of this, but there was one directed for Heloisa, and I just wanted to acknowledge you, Gregorio, that we haven't missed it, but he was interested in the reception from the teachers and facilitators on your project. I wonder whether there's a way we can connect people in the chat to presenters somehow, because I can see John is ready to move us on because we're very delayed today. So maybe that's something we can pick up with the organisers. And Gregorio, I'm sure we'll have your email address, so we will connect you. Thank you so much. And Gloria, do write that down. Maybe we can find a board somewhere. Let's give one final round of applause to our wonderful presenters today.